Hi, it's Ken. Welcome to this week's Frequently Asked Spiritual Questions video. If this is your first time here, I invite you to subscribe and click the bell when you do so. My focus in responding to your questions is to support your deepening experience of and relationship with the divine by whatever name. This week's question comes from Angelica Grossman. Her question is, how did you learn to love yourself? That's a great question, Angelica. Maybe I should reframe the question and say, how am I continuing to learn to love myself? Because it's really an ongoing practice. So let me see if I can distill this down and give a somewhat succinct answer. So the short answer is the way I learned to love myself is that I surrendered my life to God. The longer answer to that is that there was an enormous amount of suffering that was going on in my life leading up to June 30th, 2011, when I surrendered everything to God. Now, I want to be clear. Surrender, the work to prepare for surrender would leave us all wishing, or at least if you're like me, it will leave you wishing for a light switch on the wall. After all this work, I just want to flip the switch and then it's done and I don't have to deal with this again. It's not how surrender is. Surrender is a choice, a conscious choice on the part of the empowered separate self to stop exerting control, to a presence that previously was the empowered separate self servant. God, you do this, make it happen this way, etc. It's quite a shift. So as you can imagine, or as you're experiencing perhaps, in the lead up to surrender, the empowered separate self is projecting all these nightmares that will happen if we let go of control, if we turn life over to God. And I had lots of that going on. I had received the Beneath the Sand download in September of the prior year of 2010, and I was trying to beneath the sand my way through the suffering that I was dealing with. And if you've experienced Beneath the Sand, you know that it results in a visceral experience of your wholeness at the level of the body. It's quite an extraordinary experience. And it also sets a contrast between who you really are, the experience of that, and those parts of your life where you think you're still in charge, where you're still in control. And it did that for me. And so the suffering curve went into a steep climb. And in the early part of 2011, I had left mortgage lending behind and opened myself to what I thought was God's call on my life. And there weren't crickets, but whereas there were people signing up for group sessions and so on at the end of 2010, at the beginning of 2011, there wasn't enough to sustain me financially. And I was really worried. I was scared. And I was really angry at God. So in those months was a lot of introspection, a lot of anger, a lot of screaming, a lot of swearing at God, and a realization over time that I was responsible for the dynamic of my suffering, if for no other reason than I had held up a stop sign to God by saying, I've got this covered. And I don't want to call it an ace in the hole, but I had a perspective that was more extraordinary than anything else that I had experienced in my life to that point. And it was beyond my rational mind to understand. And that experience was the experience of God's expression as me, as these gifts, these healing gifts or spiritual gifts, however you want to think about them, that expressed through me. And what I knew about those is that I didn't ask for them. For quite a while, I didn't think I wanted them. I resisted them. But I knew more than anything else that I was not personally responsible for them. Meaning, I was not the cause of what happened when I went into transmission with someone or a group. God was doing something through me that was way beyond my comprehension. And that is difficult to reconcile, or at least it was for me. It was very difficult to reconcile that with the projections that my separate self kept coming up with. You're going to be homeless, you're this and that. So what I did to follow through on this was I actually embraced the projections of my separate self as real, Angelica. When I worried that I would be homeless, I started visualizing my homelessness, which would upset any law of attraction practitioner to the core of their being. I did it, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it, actually. It was a very, very powerful experience for me. Remember, the bulk of practitioners of the law of attraction are practicing in controlling or manifesting consciousness. They think they're still in charge. They're telling God what to do. But there's a glass ceiling there, which is the inaccessibility to resolve that core wound, that lack of self-love that we all have as human beings. The only place it can come from is God. So that work over those months was about realizing, here's this experience of God that is beyond anything that I have ever experienced before. And in contrast to that is this nightmare that I keep creating in my life, trying to pursue experiences of love. And so I had actually two themes in my life. I thought there were two. One of them was self-love, and I thought the other one was money. And then I took an Enneagram workshop, and I realized actually money is it's taken me actually years to be able to articulate it this way, but I can say it now. Money is a consciousness amplifier. It's not something in and of itself. It is a consciousness amplifier. And so for me, money was love. And that's how I was interacting with it. So somebody might want to try to hire me and I'd be like, oh, you love me? I mean, that was sort of my energetic response. I don't think I ever actually said that to someone. Okay, so all roads lead to surrender. And when my separate self projected, you're going to be homeless, I embraced it because I realized that my resistance to homelessness, my fear of losing the roof over my head, was a form of control. And control was effectively a stop sign to God saying, I've got this covered. And I was having this experience of God working through me that had nothing to do with control, in contrast to all these parts of my life where I thought I needed to control. And I realized intellectually the only answer here is to surrender. So when I surrendered, I had already accepted all these possible outcomes. And believe it or not, the possible outcomes, including homelessness, including being called home, including dying, including being an itinerant healer and never seeing my children again, including going back into the banking world and never doing anything spiritual again, which was horrifying to me that might happen. Not that there's anything wrong with banking. It's just that in this spiritual space, it felt like I was breathing oxygen for the first time in my life. It was a source of such energy and inspiration and resonance in every part of my being. And I just thought, well, if that's what God wants, I have no idea what God wants of me. I don't know how God is trying to express in my life. So when I surrendered, I had already embraced all the worst case scenarios that my separate self could project. And believe it or not, the idea of those things being real was a relief. That's how much I was suffering. And I realized I have created this suffering for myself. I am responsible. And then I surrendered. And then I had an experience of God's love for me that I'd never had before. And it was without beginning. It is without beginning or end. And it isn't about me. It's not that God has a unique love for me, Ken. God has that love for all of us, no matter who we are, no matter what we've done. And I could see that because I would work with people who had been through traumatic experiences, sexual abuse, all sorts of horrific things, or had done horrible things to other people. Either way, God was there. I could see it. I could feel it when I was witnessing, when I was working with them. I had that experience flooding through my being at a level I'd never even imagined was possible. There's no way I could have conceived of it. And then every moment of every day since, I am with the experience of integrating and embodying that. And every time something comes up that I've done or that I think of or I get triggered in some way, I've learned to recognize that pattern of response, that unconscious pattern of response, and make it conscious. And by making it conscious, I can recognize, oh, there's the feeling going on, or I'm starting to get upset. All that is a pattern on the part of my separate self. It's delivering a golden egg over and over to me. It's inviting me to be with that, to transmute that wound and open up to an even deeper experience of God's love. Think of it as God's love together with whatever this wound is unwraps that part of my whole self. So the process of learning how to love myself more fully continues every day for me. Being who I really am. Not just accepting, but loving each and every aspect of the life that I've lived, all the ways that I've behaved, all the things I've done, all the relationships that I've failed at and succeeded at, and on and on and on. All of these, even when I can't understand them rationally, I can feel and experience that love that has as its origin the divine. And anytime that starts to fade, or I feel like it's fading, I see that as a sign and an invitation to surrender at a deeper level. And Angelica, this has taken me in places that I would have never imagined. In 2011, I was almost homeless. In August of 11, I had less money than I'd ever had before in my life. And my ex-wife, the mother of my children, was giving me gift cards to pay for groceries so I could eat. She had said, don't worry about child support until you get going. Let's try to make sure you have a roof over your head. I was that close. And then in 2018, I received guidance that I was to stop the resonance experiment, which was something I'd done in 2017, and instead focus on writing a book. And the resonance experiment was a source of wonderful interaction with the community. And it was also a pathway for receiving an energy exchange called money. And it brought up some of those deep fears again. Well, am I going to be homeless again, God? What's going to happen? Deeper surrender. God is with us every step of the way. The process of loving yourself, the process of loving myself, is something I engage in and integrate and embody more fully every day. And the pathway is all about surrender and the integration and embodiment that follows. Angelica, thanks for the question. To Angelica and everyone who is watching this video, I would love for you to comment below. Share whatever's coming up with you, for you, in response to this video. If there are questions you want to ask of the community or of me in the context of the community publicly, please do that. If you have a question you'd like to submit for this series, you can use a link in the description to do so. If this video resonates with you, please do give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Of course, if you're resonating here, please do take the next step and formally join our community by heading over to kenwstone.com and add your name and email address to the newsletter. Peace.